And my time will begin now. Dominique Ray, accused of murder, zero physical evidence linking him to said murder, convicted based solely off of the testimonies of a severely mentally ill and delusional white male. It only took a one-day penalty phase, just 24 hours to the jury to condemn the innocent Black man to death, to cruel, unconstitutional, and irreversible death. My name is Emily Zhang, and I affirm the resolution that the death penalty should be abolished in the United States. To my first point, the death penalty is uneconomical at every aspect, from the prosecution to the incarceration to the very execution. Kimberly Amadio of The Balance explained in November of 2019 how a Susquehanna University report found that, on average, across all 50 states, a death row inmate costs $1.12 million more than a general population inmate. In July of 2018, there were 2,738 inmates on death row. That's almost $3 billion in additional expense as compared to if they'd been sentenced in life in prison instead. That is $3 billion taxpayer dollars, hard-earned money from hardworking citizens going towards unconstitutional and immoral practices. $3 billion taxpayer dollars spent on killing, $3 billion taxpayer dollars gone. To my second point, the death penalty violates constitutional rights, including the 8th Amendment against cruel and unusual punishment and the 14th Amendment, which allots the right to life. As Supreme Court Justice William J. Brennan said during the Gregg versus Georgia case of 1976, death is not only unusual in its pain, in its finality, and in its enormity, but it treats members of the human race as non-humans, as objects to be toyed with and discarded. It is thus inconsistent with the fundamental premise of the clause that even the vilest of criminals remains a human who is still in the possession of common human dignity. The death penalty is thus violative of the 8th and 14th Amendments. Voiding fundamental amendments, the death penalty is simply inhumane and strips innocents and criminals alike of their right to life. Once a life is gone, it's gone. There's no more hope for rehabilitation, no more possibility for future contributions to society, and simply no more. My third point, the death penalty kills innocent human beings. The National Academy of Sciences reports that at least 4.1% of defendants sentenced to death in the United States are innocent. The number of innocent people is likely more than double those who are actually exonerated and freed from death row. These innocents, their lives matter, their families miss them, they are being killed at the hands of the justice system that is supposed to protect them, the ordinary citizens, that is supposed to protect us and them and all American citizens. When is enough enough? How many innocents must die? How many failures of the justice system must cost people their lives? How many will it take before we finally say no more? To my fourth point, the death penalty disproportionately affects African Americans among other marginalized communities. Studies which examine the relationship between race and the death penalty have now been conducted in every active death penalty state. In 96% of the reviews, there is a pattern of either race of victim or race of defendant discrimination, or both. Approximately 35% of those executed since 1976 have been Black, even though Blacks constitute only 12% of the population. The odds of receiving a death sentence are nearly 4 times higher if the defendant is Black than if he or she is white. Of people currently on death row, 82% were convicted in cases involving white victims. In the status quo, we are valuing white lives over those of people of color. The people that are being put to death are somebody's children, somebody's siblings, parents, friends, and most importantly, they're simply somebody's. It's time to say no more. No more killing people for the colors of their skin. No more unnecessary violence. No more unnecessary death. No more. Thus, I affirm.
All right, let's move into cross-examination, 2 minutes.
Can everyone? All right, 3, 2, 1. Your stance is to abolish the death penalty, but what alternative do you propose to the death penalty?
Well, there are several lesser sentences, including life in prison with the possibility of parole and other sentences.
All right, thank you. Your first point is about the economics of the death penalty, is that correct?
Yes.
Do you think money can quantify life?
I don't think money can quantify life, but when you're using that money to strip humans of their life and their dignity, then that's simply a cost that shouldn't be happening.
Okay, thank you. Second, you talk about the unconstitutionality of the death penalty, correct?
Yes.
In this, you're saying that it's unconstitutional because it's inhumane, correct?
Yes, it's inhumane, not just of stripping people of the right to life because you are directly killing them, but also because it is found to be cruel and unusual.
How is the death penalty exactly cruel and unusual?
Because you're putting these inmates, whether they're innocent or criminals, through severe pain. And there's so much, every time that the lethal injection has failed, testimonies from the victims who survived said that they were in excruciating pain, and it isn't actually painless like many would like to believe.
Thank you. And your third point talks about innocent people and how their families miss them. Are you talking about criminals whose families miss them?
Regardless of the fact, criminals or innocents, regardless of who the person is, yes, their families miss them.
All right, and do you suggest that criminals, murderers, rapists deserve to have the same amenities as working class Americans?
I don't think that they deserve to have the same working class amenities, but if you look at their families, they are completely innocent and they just have their parents, their siblings just dying to the justice system.
Thank you.
Con opening.
Okay. 3, 2, 1. Margaret Elizabeth Daly, arrested for attacking Pete Gibbons. Yeah, I cut him. I should have done a better job. I would have killed him, but I thought of the gas chamber. I strongly negate the resolution that the death penalty should be abolished in the United States because it deters crime. Because the death penalty means justice for families of victims. And finally, life in prison without parole simply does not work. First, the death penalty deters crime. Orellis Matthew Stewart, imprisoned for bank robbery. He could have shot the unaccompanied cop. He could have killed him, but didn't because he thought of the death penalty. Similarly, a study done by Clemson University and Emory University shows that when one guilty person is executed by the death penalty, 18 possible lives could be saved. 18 innocent families could stay together because of the death penalty. Second, the death penalty means justice for families of victims. The Arkansas representative, Rebecca Petty, her 12-year-old daughter was kidnapped, strangled, and raped, 12 years old. She says that the death penalty helped her find peace and close this terrible chapter of her life. This helped her move on. Similarly, Belinda Kreitz, her family member, was also victimized by a terrible murderer. She says that the only reason that she needs to support the death penalty is what the murderer did to her family member. And finally, Frederick Romano, also a family member of a victim of a brutal murder, said that the death penalty is not about revenge, but about justice. His wife, Vicky Romano, said that revenge would look like going out and killing one of the murderer's family members. But the death penalty isn't revenge. It's the law. Finally, life in prison without parole simply does not work. The United States Marshal Services shows that Lester Eubanks is wanted by the Ohio Adult Parole Authority. He went on a shopping trip for good behavior during his life in prison without parole sentence. He was supposed to have the death penalty for the rape and murder of a young child. However, he got life in prison without parole instead. He was able to walk out of this sentence. They haven't found him 50 years later. Life in prison without parole does not represent who we are or who we want to be. It so easily allows guilty people of terrible crimes to walk away. Now they are on the loose because of a faulty system. In conclusion, I strongly negate the resolution that we should abolish the death penalty in the United States because it deters crime. It acts as justice for the family members of victims. And finally, life in prison without parole simply does not work. Thank you.
All right. 2-minute cross-examination. And my time will begin now. So in your first point, you said that the death penalty deters crime. Is that correct?
Yes, correct.
Is every single resident of the United States of America a potential criminal?
What do you mean? Like, can
Does-
anyone crime?
Does everyone have the potential to be a criminal?
Yes, anyone has the potential to be a criminal, but also everyone has the potential to be a victim.
Okay.
How many more people are likely to become victims?
So with these 350 something million people in the United States, are we sharing thoughts? Are we physically in the brains of each and every one of them?
All right, so we can, the general psychological effect of the death penalty deters crime.
Are we sharing thoughts with them? Could you give me a yes or no answer, please?
No, that would be creepy if we shared thoughts with every single person.
So how can we rightfully assume why these people are or are not committing crimes?
I just said that the general psychological effect of the death penalty is to deter crime.
Okay, so looking at this psychologically, when a crime punishable by death penalty is committed, is it usually a crime of passion?
If you talk about murder, assault, rape, these are all crimes of passion. These are all terrible.
So in this situation where they are so angry, so passionate, sometimes even delusional or fantastical, are they properly in the state of mind to be considering consequences like this?
I just gave you 2 examples of people that thought through why they would not.
So 2 examples is representative of hundreds of millions of American residents?
No, but like I said, once the execution of one person, 18 potential lives are saved, which directly correlates to people. That's
All right, let's move into the refutation speeches, starting with the pro.
Can I run a minute of prep, please?
Yeah.
And my 3-minute refutation of the con opening case will begin now. In her first point, my opponent claimed that the death penalty serves as a crime deterrent. With that being said, let us first examine the opinions of psychologists before examining the flaws in this argument logically, both of which support the contrary. From a psychological perspective, Dr. Jonathan Groner of Ohio State University said that the psychological mindset of the criminal is such that they are not able to consider consequences at the time of the crime. Most crimes are crimes of passion that are done in situations involving intense excitement or concern. They do not consider the consequences in a logical way. When criminals commit crimes that are punishable by the death penalty, they are so passionate, so angry, excited, sometimes even fantastical or delusional that they are not considering punishments like the death penalty. Furthermore, since we are not in the heads of every single US citizen, because every single US citizen is a possible criminal, we cannot rightfully assume that the death penalty is why they are or are not committing crimes. Any reasoning on such is purely speculatory and has no scientific merit. A report published by the ACLU also found this, saying that there has been no credible sources deeming the death penalty as a proper crime deterrent. What isn't speculatory, though, is that innocent people have died and will continue to die under the death penalty. Such people include Larry Griffin, Leo Jones, Troy Davis. When is enough enough? In this argument, we must weigh on probability, because the probability that innocent people have died and will continue to die under the death penalty is near 100. But that of the death penalty actually deterring crime, near 0. And further, in my opponent's second point, she said that the death penalty delivers justice and that it helps bring closure to victims' families. However, a poll sent out to victims' families found that only 1.1 out of 20 of these families whose perpetrators were sentenced to death said that the death penalty brought closure. We must once again weigh on probability and realize the chance of this bringing closure is very, very slim. And the anecdotal evidence that my opponent has brought up doesn't represent the larger population of victims and their families. Lastly, my opponent said that the life without parole system is faulty and that people can have the ability to escape, and she brought up an example of one person who escaped. However, someone breaking out of maximum security jail and not being found for 50 years, that is a rare, rare occurrence. Innocent people dying is not. We must seek probability and magnitude because once again, it is less probable that this will happen, and in terms of magnitude, an innocent has died. Thus, I affirm.
3, 2, 1. My opponent in her case talked about how the death penalty is unethical, unconstitutional, how innocent people are killed, and how there is racial discrimination within the death penalty. First, on the economic aspect of it. Lives outweigh money. Lives outweigh money. Simple as that. The death penalty, she says, costs $3 billion. That's $3 billion put to making sure mass criminals don't repeat their crime. That money is put to make sure that families staring at empty beds receive closure. That money is not getting thrown out the window. It is being put to good use and is helping many people. Second, the death penalty is not unconstitutional. She said that it violates the 8th and 14th Amendment, that it is used cruelly and arbitrarily. However, the Supreme Court has put limits on age, mental health, and discrimination, and each case is very thought out. They're not just randomly executing random people. These are for the worst criminals. According to Attorney General Barr, the death penalty is used for the worst criminals. Next, the innocent people are murdered. She talked about how families of criminals will miss them if they are killed by the execution. But when weighing, families of murdered victims staring at empty beds at night outweigh families of murderers. It was the murderer's decision to pull the trigger, their decision to commit an atrocity. It was not the victim's decision to be at the wrong place at the wrong time. And finally, she says that the death penalty is associated with racial discrimination. If we were to get rid of the death penalty tomorrow, racism would not disappear. This is not an issue of the death penalty, but at larger, the justice system. Reforms are in place to ensure that these effects will be mitigated in the future. Throughout history, we have seen many racist systems, starting from slavery, going to segregation, and finally to the present. But reforms are what has mitigated the effects of racism in the past, and it will continue to do that in the future. That is what needs to happen. Reforms, not the outright abolition of the death penalty. On weighing, having the death penalty as a tool in the toolbox is so much more important than outright abolition of the death penalty. Thank you.
Thank you. And now we're going to move into closing speeches, 2 minutes each.
How much prep time do I have remaining?
So you used a minute. So you have a minute left, I believe.
Could I run that, please?
Yes.
And my time will begin now. Lives outweigh money. But what happens when the money is being put to ruthlessly slaughter innocents? What happens when the money is being used to kill people for the color of their skin? What happens when that money is used for plain and simple murder? The nature of humanity, its essence, is to feel another's pain as one's own and to act to take that pain away. There is nobility in compassion, a beauty in empathy, a grace in forgiveness. John Connolly. Judge, I'm not asking you to empathize, sympathize even with criminals. I'm asking you to empathize with Larry Griffin, Leo Jones, and Troy Davis. Were Brian Terrell, Carlton, Michael Gary, and Dominique Ray, as my opponent would call, the worst of the worst? Executed murderer, and there's the same amount of murderers in this world. Execute an innocent, and there's now one more. Judge, repeatedly throughout this debate, we have come across the topic of lives lost versus lives saved. And you can speculate about hypothetical lives that are being saved all you want, but that doesn't change the fact that innocent people are being directly killed by our justice system, that people of the United States are condemning other innocent people of the United States just like them to death, to cruel, unusual, and irreversible death. In this debate, my opponent has repeatedly brought up points that have an incredibly low probability and are backed neither by scientific evidence nor by logical evidence. When she says that the death penalty helps bring closure, surveys have shown that they didn't. When she says that it helps deter crime, expert opinion and the logical side of this shows that they haven't. When she says that people may escape, the probability is close to zero. Judge, we have to choose the innocent lives over the future hypothetical scenarios, which is why you must cast a pro ballot in today's debate.
Okay. 3, 2, 1. Throughout this debate, there have been many common themes like live safe versus live lost, but my opponent has only seemed to get half of the story. She has talked about crimes of passion, but she hasn't really talked about the people who carefully planned out their crimes, like the Boston Marathon bombing, the Oklahoma City bombing, school shootings, massacres. I'm sure they at least Googled if their state had the death penalty before committing their atrocities. The death penalty can serve as a deterrent in these kinds of situations. It is the thing that stops criminals from pulling the trigger because people care about themselves. If they know that harm will come to them from doing something bad to somebody else, that psychologically will deter people from committing these crimes. We also talked about the pursuit of innocent lives. Innocent lives killed by the death penalty and innocent lives killed by murderers. The probability of innocent lives killed by murderers or criminals is far more likely to happen than innocent lives lost by the death penalty. But even if innocent lives are lost, the con is working to end this. Everyday technology is evolving through DNA technology and forensics. We can help put an end to that small number of people killed by the death penalty, even though it is such a small number. In the con world, in the status quo, more lives are saved. But in the future, the con world will save even more lives. Thank you.
Thank you. Well done, guys. I guess round of applause. Last debate of the day. Awesome.